You would think that when once you left high school, that you would leave your really bad childhood memories behind, such as uh, the schoolyard bully that you may have dealt with on a regular basis. But unfortunately, that isn't one of those things you can put behind when you become an adult, like awkward yearbook photos and braces, maybe. Your workplace environment can have bullies too. In fact, they're more common than you might think. In a national survey, the Workplace Bullying Institute found that 19% of adults said they personally had been bullied at work, while another 19% said that they'd seen it happen to someone else. So today I'm going to break down what workplace bullying actually is, what it looks like, and how you can properly deal with it. Because we know how we would really like to deal with it, but we are trying to evolve and get away from that type of behavior. And also, your well-being comes first. See, it comes just like sexual harassment. It's uninvited, undeserved, and in most cases, really in all cases, unwarranted. Being bullied at work can harm both your mental and your physical health. Potential effects can include major stress, anxiety, depression, trauma, high blood pressure, stomach issues, and more. It is really very damaging. It creates a place where you're just always afraid and you cannot be yourself. People get angry and confused, and they stay concerned about their job all day, every day. The main question in the back of their minds being, is today the day I'm going to be fired? And that's just no way to live. The definition of bullying is repeated health-harming mistreatment of one or more persons, we're going to call them the targets, by one or more perpetrators. The abusive conduct, including verbal abuse, is intimidating, threatening, or sometimes even humiliating to the target. It can and often does interfere with the target's ability to get their work done. Workplace bullying goes far beyond a minor disruption or small annoyance. Rather, it creates a psychological power imbalance between the person doing the bullying and their target or targets, to a point where that person at the receiving end develops a feeling of helplessness. And unfortunately, unlike harassment, bullying isn't illegal. What's the difference, you ask? Well, harassment, including the kind where someone or someone's create a hostile work environment, hinges on being mistreated based on a protected class, such as sex, race, religion, or national origin. If the bad behavior is unrelated to one of those, it might be toxic and soul-crushing, but it's not against the law. So we have 4 types of workplace bullies. Now, the majority, with 61% of workplace bullies, are bosses. But that also means that more than a third are not managers, but rather peers or even lower level employees. Bullying can come from any direction in the organizational chart, and it can take many different forms. So here are 4 archetypes you might encounter and the behaviors they display. And keep in mind that one bully can adopt multiple tactics. The first one we're going to call the screaming Mimi. Think aggressive communication. When you imagine a bully, what comes to mind? If it's a stereotypical yelling, cursing, angry meanie, then you are thinking of what we can call the screaming Mimi. This type of bully tends to make a public scene and instill fear not only in their target, but also in all their coworkers, who might understandably be terrified of speaking up for fear of becoming the next target. Aggressive communication can include not only yelling, sending angry emails, or other forms of hostility, but also using aggressive body language, like putting themselves into a power stance before launching into long tirades about why someone's idea won't work. The next one we're going to bring to the attention of everyone is the constant critic. The constant critic. Think of disparagement and humiliation. So, you start this job and you think you are doing an excellent job. You're going, you're happy, and you think that it's going to be a great gig. But then your new boss starts criticizing you for every little thing you do. And it gets to the point that the disparaging comments are pretty much the only kind of communication you ever receive from this person. Not only do you get chastised on a regular basis when you make a mistake, or when said person arbitrarily decides that you have failed, but they also make sure you never take credit for any of your successes. You might try to compensate by overworking yourself, but the harder you work, the worse it gets. Everything you do is wrong. They might even say, every team is just as good as its weakest link, and you're the weakest link. I've heard that a time or two myself, and that's just not cool. You eventually begin to believe this person. They may not yell at you to your face or in front of other people, but they'll disparage you so regularly that you begin to doubt your abilities and wear you down so much that the quality of your work might objectively suffer. I mean, you get so petrified of what is going to come out of your boss's mouth next, and your performance begins to go downhill. And ultimately, you may end up getting fired. This type of bully might humiliate you one-on-one or in public by pointing out your mistakes, taking credit for your work, leaving you out of things, socially isolating you, or even playing jokes on you. One of the most frustrating aspects could be that your boss routinely criticizes you for doing things wrong or differently when they never even give you instructions in the first place. They can get angry at you because you didn't perform a task that they didn't even tell you to do in the first place. The next one we're going to talk about is called the gatekeeper. With this one, think of manipulation and withholding of resources. Some bullies manipulate their targets and withhold resources, whether that's instructions, information, time, or help from others, setting you up to fail. They might only tell you about 3 steps of a process when there are actually 5, or pile so much work on you that there's no reasonable way for you to complete it by the deadline. They might give you a poor performance review when your work isn't actually so poor, or punish you for being 1 minute late to a meeting when others who are tardy don't face any repercussions at all. The gatekeeper can also be a peer or subordinate. They might forget to invite you to an important call or pass on pertinent details that will prevent you from doing your job. The last one is the two-headed snake. With this one, think about behind the scenes meddling and tearing down your reputation. One of the most difficult types of bullies to detect and therefore deal with is this one who pretends to be your friend and champion while undermining you behind your back. They're controlling your reputation with others and tearing you to shreds, calling you unreliable, unskilled, unthis, unthat. But to your face, they're your friend. You might eventually find out if someone breaks rank and tips you off, but often this bully will ask people to keep their remarks confidential. It goes without saying that it's hard to combat something you don't even know is happening. Why do workplace bullies get away with it? Bullies are often high performers. They might be a top salesperson who brings in huge deals, or a brilliant engineer who's always coming up with efficient solutions, or a marketer who's managed to double a site's traffic, or whatever it is, they're bringing value to the company, which means the company has an incentive to keep them on board and happy. Some bullies also work to ingratiate themselves to their superiors and perhaps their peers too, even as they abuse one or more of the people they oversee or work with. Put all of that together, and instead of being held accountable for their bullying behavior, they might be getting rewarded with praise, raises, promotions, time off, and you might be all the more intimidated by the prospect of casting a shadow on such a star. The bottom line is that bullies get away with their behavior mostly because of the company and the culture it fosters. You want to look at the personalities of the perpetrators and say, well, that explains it all. No, it doesn't. What really explains it is the work environment that provides the opportunities that allow these people to get hired in the first place and then to bully with impunity. Without the work environment giving the green light or providing the license to unbridled mistreatment, bullying wouldn't happen. Now I'm going to pause for a minute just to let you think about that one, because some people need to hear this. There are ways to deal with your workplace bully, but I'm going to give you ways to deal with them legally. Figuring out how to deal with bullying can be overwhelming. So here are some tips that might help you help yourself to be able to deal with the painful bullying at your workplace. First of all, you need to speak up and set your boundaries early on, because you have a window of opportunity to nip things in the bud before you become the long-term target of a workplace bully. One of the best things that you can do for yourself is the minute somebody mistreats you, that you speak up in the moment right there and squash it. Because everybody likes the path of least resistance, right? So here's a couple options. Call attention to your bully's values. Say, hey, I know you really care about everyone feeling valued, but when you do X, it undermines that intention. Maybe we could try Y in the future. Explain why it's a problem. You just tell them, listen, I hear what you're saying, but I need you to stop doing X. I treat you with respect, and I need you to do the same. And don't forget your body language. Stand up tall and arms at your side, your nose up, and speak with a clear voice. Because if you're feeling nervous about standing up for yourself, that's going to show your bully. And that will just make them pick on you even more. And the bad news is that if you just brush it off and let it continue, it's going to get worse. A lot of times people let it go and let it go and let it go. And by the time you realize you're being bullied, it might be too late. Once that power imbalance has been cemented, it can be virtually impossible for the target to fix. Now, sometimes you just got that one person that just is relentless and will not let up. But I will tell you how to deal with that later on this podcast. So if you muster the courage to speak up after months of being bullied, the abuse is not just unlikely to stop. It may even intensify. So if you're that far down the path, you might be better off taking a different approach. The second thing is you can document the abuse in your performance. If it took you a while to realize the full severity of what was happening to you, and you feel like you missed your chance to react quickly, start documenting. Keep a journal of the who, what, when, where, why of things that happen. If you're in a staff meeting and the bullying occurs, then go back to your desk and write down who else was in the staff meeting, what was said, why it was said, and try to put in as much detail as you can around the facts of the situation. Because if you decide to report the bully later, you're going to want to be able to give concrete examples of the behaviors you're describing. File away any emails or any other hard copy evidence to back up your side of the story. Collect documentation that demonstrates quantifiable results of projects you're working on, as well as any praise-filled emails, messages you've gotten from other coworkers. The third thing is self-care. Take care of yourself outside of work. Because bullying can take a huge toll on you. Physically, mentally, emotionally. It can really mess with you. So join some things happening outside of work that would make you feel good about yourself. Do yoga or something that's relaxing. Spend time with your friends and family, and lean on them for support. But just be aware that venting constantly about your work issues could strain your relationships. And if it gets to that point, consider going to a therapist. Because yes, it can get to that point. Because this is the thing. If you are a bully, and I'm speaking to you, and you're picking on somebody at your job, just because, it's fun, you think it's fun, think about this. In this day and age, you don't know what a person is dealing with outside of the workplace. And your constant disparaging comments, and things of that nature can really affect a person mentally, especially if they're already dealing with things outside of the workplace. And you're not giving this person a happy medium. Maybe you need to put yourself in their shoes and really think about what you're saying to someone before you say it. Now, I'm speaking to my audience. The fourth thing you can do is do your research. Does your company have a policy about bullying, mistreatment, verbal abuse, or anything similar that you might be able to reference? Since bullying is not illegal, many companies don't have a formal policy against it. But it is worth your time to check your employee handbook or any other document that lays out the organization's values and expectations. It can only strengthen your case if you're able to point to that language if you decide to make a complaint. You might want to consider seeking legal advice to confirm whether or not your situation might qualify as harassment or otherwise offer some sort of legal recourse. The next thing you could do is talk to your manager or someone else if it's your boss that is the bully. If you made attempts to deal with the situation and haven't gotten anywhere, I recommend speaking to your manager, assuming they aren't the bully, of course. If your boss is the problem, think about whether you trust one of their peer managers or someone above them enough to seek their advice. The key here is to assess your specific situation and try to gauge the relationships within your company. For instance, it probably wouldn't be wise to go to the person who hired your bully or worked with them at a previous job. And you definitely wouldn't turn to their work BFF or someone who is related to them in the case of a family company. Because if you do, and it gets back to the bully, it could make things even worse. Before you make any moves to talk to HR or someone in the C-suite, you might want to do a few things. First, decide who to speak with. And I'm not a fan of taking a complaint to HR. And find a high-ranking individual you feel you can approach with a plan to save money. The decision of whether or not to go to HR comes down to what type of HR person you're dealing with. One type of HR person is really focused on compliance and the rules, and the other type of HR person is focused on culture and people. You might have trouble with the former, but if you think you have the latter, they don't need a corporate policy to help you. Second, think about how you can make a business case rather than a personal plea, no matter who you decide to approach. Literally calculating the cost of the bully to the company in terms of turnover, absenteeism, lost productivity, and more. Your documentation can also help at this stage because you'll be able to cite specific examples of time wasted and resources lost. Finally, think about what it is that you want to achieve out of all of this. Is it that you just want someone to know, or is it that you want their help? Do you want this person transferred? What do you need from HR? And what will you do if you don't get what you're looking for? Ultimately, your dignity and self-respect and psychological well-being is so much more important than the paycheck you get. The answer is that you're going to leave. And that's okay. The last thing, look for a new job. The reality is that most bullying situations, and that's 77%, end in the target leaving their job. Whether it's because they got fed up and quit, or they end up getting fired. Sometimes because their performance suffered so much under the stress of long-term abuse. So it's in your best interest to start job searching as soon as you can. Because if your company doesn't have a policy or culture you trust to squash bullying swiftly and forcefully, it can help to have an offer or at least prospects lined up in case things go awry. Now, if you see someone else being bullied, you don't have to be all wrapped up in it. If you see it, you know it's happening, and you don't do anything, you're giving permission for this person to act that way with your silence. If you feel comfortable speaking in the moment, do it. State the problem, state the consequences, and offer a solution. You can also ask quietly without turning it into a raging gossip parade. Ask your other colleagues if they notice something and maybe join forces. That might mean you all commit to calling out bullying behavior in the moment whenever it happens. Or take turns going to HR. How to avoid bullying or avoid a bully in future jobs. Because the last thing you want to do is finally escape one only to encounter another one at your next job. To that end, ask a few types of questions during your future interview processes that will help you assess whether your future boss has a history of narcissistic bullying and whether the company's culture would tolerate any bullying if it were to arise. You ask these types of questions like, what's the manager I would be reporting to like? If it's with someone other than your prospective boss. If the response is, oh my gosh, they're wonderful, everybody loves them, that may be a reassuring sign. But if you sense some hesitation and then get something like, well, he's good. People like him. And he's been here a long time. That's a red flag, people. Then ask this question, well, what's your strategic plan around company culture? And how do you manage the organization's culture? And if they have nothing to say in response to tell you about active steps they take to foster their culture, it might not be a great sign. Another question is, how do you live your core values and how do they show up in the work here? Do you talk about them on a regular basis? If they can't talk much about these, or even worse, don't really know what the core values are, again, not a great sign. Who are the corporate heroes here? And who are the stellar people, and why are they the stellar people? See, these questions get to the heart of what drives a company. Try to get a sense for who's celebrated and why. And then ask yourself, is that the place you'd want to work at? Your days at the office or anywhere you work, whether it be in the restaurant industry, or in the hospital field, wherever, should not be filled with aggressive communication, humiliation, and manipulation. If they are, remember first that it's not your fault. And then take whatever steps you can to take care of yourself and put that bully in the past once and for all. And on that note, people, I'm complete.